Hey y'all, I'm Ash Vampire, and you're watching Shoring Up. Okay, we are done talking about key visual novel adaptations for a long while, I think. We're going to get back to some more varied style shows, and we're going to pick it up with something that is so wildly different from anything he would ever even consider doing that there's probably a lot of anime that wouldn't even come close to it, just generally speaking. I am, of course, talking about relatively recent show, Mahou Shoujo Site. This show, I think, is fine. It's okay. It's not going to win any awards in any particular department. It doesn't really stand out in any real way except one, which we'll get to. But even in that one way, it's not really going to earn praise, I think, from most people for that. It's not insulting, it's not bad in any real particular way that would encourage me to lower my opinion of it. It's just fine, and it's a relatively good time. I think it's a perfectly reasonable way to spend your time as far as, new anime that you might want to watch, or at least relatively new anime you might want to watch. So let's go ahead and get into it and get into the exact little talking points that I've got about Site. The first one that I want to bring up is that it is very obvious right from the get-go that Site has some very clear influences. Obviously, from just a overall perspective, it is influenced by every single shonen-style magical girl show that has come before it. But namely, the two that come to mind are Mahou Shoujo Madoka Magica, because Site is, in a lot of ways, feels like it is just trying to one-up Madoka in the dark and edgy department at every possible turn, and you can decide whether or not you think that that makes it a good or bad show. It's very much a personal preference thing, but it definitely is there, and it wears its influences on its sleeve especially hard in the Madoka department. I also think that Mahou Shoujo Site draws a lot of influences from the Nanoha franchise, in particular with the large cast of characters and the very in-depth world lore. It's a little bit more vague, I think, if you're going to try to make this comparison, but all in all, I do think that it is drawing heavily from this wide field of magical girl shows that are more angled toward otaku consumption as opposed to, young Japanese girls consumption. And with Madoka and Nanoha being the two biggest, it's just a little bit easier to see where those two in particular have clearly influenced Site. See, the thing is that while it is very obvious from the get-go that Mahou Shoujo Site is going to be very edgy, there's a lot of different elements that contribute to how it gets there. Obviously, on the face, you have, just the things that happen. Like in the first episode, you have Aya's bullies who literally put the little stray cat she's been taking care of in a cardboard box under a bridge somewhere. They literally put it in front of a train so that it gets run over and killed. Right off the bat, you have these very blatant shows of, hey, look at us, we're going to be edgy, we're going to be dark, this is what we're going for. But those things on their own, I don't think really contribute very much to the tone or mood of a show. They just kind of help to reinforce it, and in that particular case, to introduce you to the idea that this is the route the show is going to be going down. It has to do a lot more things thematically and a little bit more consistently in order to sell this idea that it is going to be an edge fest of a show. And one of the more interesting ways that it does that is in terms of the lore for which girls get chosen to be magical girls. In every single instance, they are all girls who have some sort of emotional or physical trauma that has led to emotional trauma that causes them to become candidates to receive a magical stick. And this is reinforced constantly throughout the lore. The entire plot revolves around the fact that these girls are suffering individuals that have very complicated, very fucked up emotional problems. And this kind of contributes to an interesting thing that you tend to not really see in a lot of just protagonists in media in general. Usually whenever you have emotional trauma portrayed in a protagonist, it is something that the protagonist is working very hard to get over. I think of, right off the top of my head, I think of like Iron Man 3. That is one of the biggest ones that was like in the forefront of that film. Like, that was a film that, while being an actiony fun film, did have like a lot of these like getting over trauma elements. And a lot of shows do it, a lot of movies do it, and, you know, some handle it better than others, some take a more serious note with it, but usually, and what I want to focus on with this point, is that it's always viewed through the lens of getting over this problem, of coming to terms with yourself, of coming to terms with how you have dealt with something. The thing about Site that I find particularly interesting in this regard is that it doesn't really go down that road. It doesn't really provide any avenue for these characters to be healthily dealing with their problems. Like, they're literally hunting down and hurting other magical girls, other people with similar problems to them. They are not trying to escape their problems. They're embracing it in a very unhealthy way. Like, they are getting magical, world-altering powers because they are fucked up and are encouraged. The entire system, the cycle, is there to make sure they stay that way, to cause them to experience this emotional trauma to the maximum extent possible. You very rarely get characters that have this kind of direction in terms of their character development where you kind of aren't sure if you should be rooting for them. I mean, obviously you want to root for these girls to, you know, find happiness and to, you know, you want to see them get over their trauma, but their development doesn't lead you down a path that makes you think that is where they're going. Even if they do, start to go that way, things are placed in their path, obstacles are placed in their path that kind of puts them back on a more violent or just unhealthy way of dealing with their problems. So you're kind of left with protagonists who, while you do find them engaging and while you do want to root for them in your own way, you can't really engage with them in the context that the show presents them in. It's a very interesting dichotomy between media and audience that you don't really see explored very often, and I really enjoy it in Site, because while it is an edgefest, the way it communicates with you, the audience, is very different and makes you kind of step back a little bit and start to think about it in a little bit more of an analytical context, as opposed to just sitting there and being like, oh my god, like, this is insanity. Like, this is so fucked up as to be almost comical. You can't really go down that road with Site. I mean, to a degree you can. Obviously, to a degree you can. It is incredibly edgy, and in many ways to a point of near absurdity. But just the way it interacts with you as an audience member, I think, really prevents you from going full bore down that road and enjoying it in that way. Or at least I wasn't able to. Of course, there's probably going to be people who can. But I just think that the way it talks to me as an audience member really changed how I viewed it overall. And you know, while we're here, while we've already touched on it, let's just address the fact that Mahou Shoujo Site is edgy as fuck. It is all about the edge. Everything in Mahou Shoujo Site is all about being edgy. Like, from the very beginning, with the scene of the cat being killed by being run over by a train, it just continues. And you know, I love that stuff. I personally am the guy who still listens to Linkin Park. I'm the guy that still listens to My Chemical Romance and unironically loves both of them. I love this shit. I love edgy stuff. Edgy stuff is fun to me. I think that there's a lot of thematic elements to super edgy shit that you're not going to get anywhere else, and I think that there are creative ways to handle it. And just generally, I think it's cool to watch fucked up shit. And does that make me a fucked up person? Probably. But at the same time, Mahou Shoujo Site was almost crazy for me. And not because anything that it does is particularly more fucked up than anything else that I've ever seen. It's just that it's in there all the fucking time. Just constantly. Like, it never lets up. I mean, you've got, the cat getting run over by the train. You've got everything that Aya's brother does ever at all. You've got the fact that the girls bleed from various orifices on their body when they use their power. You've got the fact that the cycle of magical girls is designed to perpetuate suffering and designed to make these girls die or succumb to their emotional trauma. You've got some of their powers are even super fucked up. Like, there's the one girl who is, a self-harmer, a cutter, and is probably borderline suicidal. And what is her stick? A fucking box cutter that she has to cut herself with. Like, it's just, it never stops. It never in any way stops. And there was a part of me that was like, even as a fan of edgy things, that I was kind of like, Jesus Christ, man, like, can you pull back on it a little bit? Like, I get it. You've established your tone. I understand what your driver is here. I understand what aesthetic you're going for. And I was like, I mean, Jesus, why so much? Like, I like it. Don't get me wrong. I like it, but it's quite a bit. And then after the show was over, I sat back and I looked at it as a whole, which I very rarely tend to do. And I realized that, well, no, wait a minute. It should absolutely have done that. There's no reason for it to have not done that, because the thing is that if you are not into edgy stuff to begin with, you were never going to be into Site. Like, even if they did pull back on a lot of these elements, it still would not be appealing to the people who don't like this kind of thing. So in that case, why not go all in, Why not full bore just dive into this idea, that this tone, this aesthetic? Why not? Because by doing that, it made me realize that this show was dedicated to being that way. That it wasn't just doing it once in a while for shock factor. That, no, this is what we are about. The author, the director, the producer, like, everybody involved. Like, this is what we are about. This is what we want to do. And it gives a certain level of authenticity, of integrity to the creation of this show, that they were willing to go that far because they knew that, this is a show that is only going to appeal to a certain type of person. So, why not? Why not go all in? And I have to give praise to Mahou Shoujo Site for deciding to go that route, to actually be okay with excluding potential audience members. It makes it much more of a niche product, but at the same time, it makes it a more enjoyable product for people like me who do actually like what it's going for. And if we're going to talk about any one particular element of Mahou Shoujo Site, I have to bring up Aya's brother. Holy dog shit, I have never seen something in anime that is not by Junji Ito that is this genuinely scary. The facial animations, the internal, his internal thoughts and the way that those are portrayed, just his voice actor, oh my god, like, everything about Aya's brother is genuinely creepy. It evokes the kind of wriggling that I feel in my spine whenever I watch one of, the types of American horror movies where it's like a demonic possession, like the faces are very reminiscent of that and very clearly draw from Junji Ito in terms of where they're drawing their inspiration in Japanese culture. It is very scary. It is genuinely frightening and genuinely creeped me out. And at the same time, because of that, because of how visceral so much of his screen time really was, he is the reason that this show goes from being just okay, and if you're gonna watch something, well, this is not a bad choice, to, though, this actually has something worth sitting down and watching. This show actually has something that is different, that is interesting, that is worth your time. I can't really say much more about him. I'm gonna be allowing the scenes that I throw up here to do a lot of the talking for me, because aside from saying that it's Junji Ito inspired and gives me the heebie-jeebies like American horror demon possession movies do, I can't really describe it any other way. It is damn near perfect in achieving that level of just genuine fear in the audience. So one of the more interesting elements of Mahou Shoujo Site's just general existence is the fact that it is a very modern story. And I mean that it is something that could only exist in the current modern era, in this particular point in time. Because it's called Mahou Shoujo Site. It is a show based on the idea that magical girls get their powers through a secret magic website. That is not something that could exist in any other point in time unless the internet was as pervasive in culture as it is now. And if it were just something like, oh, they get their powers through this website and that was it, it would just be kind of like, oh, good job, media. You're finally catching up with technology. You're finally figuring it out. Good job. Pat on the back, slow clap, whatever. It would not be significant. It would not honestly be worth talking about. But the thing about Mahou Shoujo Site is that it runs with this. That the idea of internet culture and like internet mythos is deeply, deeply embedded in how this show presents its lore, how it presents the mechanics of the villains. What sets Mahou Shoujo Site apart from anything else that might try to use the internet in its narrative is how Mahou Shoujo Site has all of these weird little like touchstones placed throughout the entire thing that are huge callbacks to much deeper internet culture, internet mythos type ideas. You've got the whole fact that Nana and all of the other site admins are like this really weird, jankily animated, like almost barely animated at all designs. And they're all black and white and feel very just kind of dropped in. Like they don't fit, they don't look right. And this adds to the creepy factor of, their existence as the show's villains. But it's a callback to like creepypastas of like that very blatant drop-in animation. Like we just cut and made this animation and we just put it into something else. And it looks really out of place and really weird, and that in and of itself is what makes it creepy, not so much the fact that we're doing this spooky, fiction about a game. This is, in my opinion, like it's a hearkening to this idea of internet myth. The site itself is almost this call out to more internet literate types of people who will understand what it's referencing. The site is kind of very heavily couched in this idea of that site you're not supposed to go to, that place that everybody probably knows exists but only hears about it in like whispers in certain places on the internet. The fact that the site has a secret page that tells that has the countdown timer for the end of the world is very reminiscent of like ARGs. There's just so many little things sprinkled into the site's mechanical function and just kind of how it affects the entire lore and the world and how these ideas are kind of represented visually that makes it feel very modern. It makes it feel like it is, it was written by somebody who is aware of the internet and is a participant in the internet, who understands how it functions as a cultural touchstone and less so as just a technological convenience. Now, the thing is as we come to our closing discussion of Mahou Shoujo Site, we have to bring up the fact that while it does do a lot of things that I personally like, or does a lot of, it really goes all in on what it is trying to achieve, it does have a couple problems in terms of, like, narrative over-explanation. There are a lot of scenes where a character will just ramble on and monologue to explain the plot to you, or to explain character motivations, or explain something, how the mechanics of magic work, what is the lore, what is anything. Like, there's a lot of scenes like that. And I know that those are a big problem for a lot of people, and even for me, like, it does get to a point. If you have, one every now and again, just to make sure the audience is on the same page, I'm a little bit forgiving, but Mahou Shoujo Site does do it a whole lot. And I mean, there's just a part of me that's like, I gotta dock it points. Like, it is kind of boring when you're that invested in a series for doing so much that you personally enjoy, and that it just kind of stalls to a complete halt and just kind of decides to explain away anything that it thinks that you don't understand quite yet, even though it does a perfectly good job of explaining everything in terms of just showing you stuff. I don't really understand why those scenes are there in a lot of cases. So, I mean, we'll not get there, but I mean, just generally speaking, it does a pretty good job of making sure that, you know, the girls the girls' powers are creative. The visualization of the powers is creative. You know, the way that the girls' hair color becomes two-toned whenever they're using their powers, you know, all the little shapes that their irises have. Like, I think it does plenty in terms of, you know, its visual presentation of the more interesting elements that, while this over-talkative thing is a big problem and a big reason why I wouldn't rate Mahou Shoujo Site higher, it's not something that I think will get in the way of someone's enjoyment too much. Like, because if you're watching this, then obviously you enjoy all the other stuff that it's doing well. So that's about it as far as I've got for Mahou Shoujo Site. I think this is perfectly acceptable thing to watch, and I encourage those who are into edgy stuff like myself to definitely check it out. So with that said, I give Mahou Shoujo Site a 6, and I will catch you on the flip side.